quickly introduce our panelists. So first, we have Chung from Baker McKenzie. Do you want to briefly tell us who you are?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Hi, my name is Chung. I'm a lawyer with Baker McKenzie, originally from Singapore, but I've been working here for about 17 years. I largely assist foreign investors and companies. So I will carry on by saying that I largely help foreign companies and businesses invest into Vietnam. It could be greenfield, it could be M&A, wide variety of sectors, and ITC included. Thank you.
Hello, everybody again. My name is Diep. I'm Executive Vice Chairman of MoMo. It's a mobile money company and money transfer. I've been in the fintech for 8 years. Before that, I work for a telecommunication company. And I would like to come here to share with you about the people.
Yeah, hi, my name is Tobias Fischer. I'm advising the Asian Development Bank on their regional fintech initiatives. We purely focus on working directly with startups as well as regulators and building the ecosystem.
Hi everyone, so I'm Warren Cammack. As we said, I work for VIB, so I'm the head of innovation there. So VIB's vision is to be the most innovative and customer-centric bank in Vietnam. So we're doing some interesting and innovative projects to help the bank to get ahead of all the other banks. I also work for Commonwealth Bank of Australia, who own 20% of VIB. So my role there is to bring capability from Australia over to Vietnam.
Okay, thank you. So today we have a panel with people from, I guess, across the region and with various amounts of experience in Vietnam. And today's panel is right now we're talking about regulations and hurdles to adoption. So if we can just jump into it, let's talk about regulation a bit. Maybe the first question will be, some countries have adopted a sort of wait-and-see approach when it comes to regulating fintech. So what are the benefits of that? Are there risks to taking a wait-and-see approach? Has that worked out better in some countries, and has that not worked so well in some countries? Is it something that we can apply here in Vietnam?
Okay, I think when it comes to the digital economy, so quite apart from fintech, anything that's technology-based, we see Vietnam certainly trying to keep pace with what the business model looks like and to evolve regulations around that. But no surprise, Vietnam, like any other, most other governments, or the more emerging nations in this region do struggle to understand what the technology is about, how is it going to be applied, and what are the things that they look out for. Now, as far as Vietnam is concerned, they have been very active in evolving a whole lot of regulations dealing with IT services, especially those which are cross-border. Some of it you would say it's welcome because it's about consumer protection and giving confidence to users. But for some of them, you sort of feel that, this is adding extra licenses and permits. And for those of you who have been in Vietnam for some time, is very well aware that Vietnam has a whole lot of red tape, rightly or otherwise. And much as the government says that efforts to reduce the red tape, I have to say that in some of the regulations that have come out, they have actually introduced more licenses and permits. I like to believe that where the direction of all this is going, especially for financial regulations, will be along the lines of, again, anything that enhances security, anything that enhances the confidence of users. And in that note, Vietnam they already have a new law which will take effect July this year, which is the law on network information security, okay, specific to the banking sector. I think we all know this. The banks are always very early adopters of technology. I recall that many years ago when I was asked to advise on electronic signatures, the only place you can find something like that were in banking regulations on interbank bank transfers. So they have come up with a draft regulation on data security in banking activities. So you could say that some of these things look as if it's headed in the right direction, but at the same time, the requirements of extra licenses and permits, and from a foreign investment point of view, whether they welcome foreign investors overtly otherwise, I think are questions for whom the answers remain to be seen.
So you have been doing business in Vietnam. Would you call this approach that the government is taking now, would you say that it's a kind of a wait-and-see approach? How do you feel about that? Is the regulations, has it prevented you from doing what your company is doing?
I think that the closest country that applied the wait-and-see is Cambodia. When we discussed with State Bank in Cambodia, they said that if there's no regulation in that, they just leave it there and watch it and regulate it later. But I think the Vietnamese State Bank do is a bit more prudent. They can look around and how it happened, see the evidence if it's success, and look at the back and forth more carefully before they approach. But they also open to the opportunities by giving us the trial license. Yes, so that see it grow and regulate it later. For example, it's like e-wallet. We operate in 2009, and we just got an official license last year. But that's fine. Yeah, they still support and open to the idea that fintech or technology can bring financial inclusion to Vietnamese people.
So even though you need to get a license, and it took you a while to get the license, it was okay. Is that what you're saying?
I think so far, I think it's okay. Yeah.
So Tobias, I mean, from the ADB perspective regionally, when it comes to various countries' wait-and-see approach.
So yeah, what I would like to add to that point is that I truly believe that the wait-and-see approach is not the right one. But however, having said that, it does not mean that you necessarily have to regulate all the fintech startups that pop up immediately. Two things, because first of all, regulators, they can't keep up with the pace of innovation. Therefore, it needs some time for the regulator. To really understand what's happening in the market. Having said that, the second point is before you can actually think of regulating something, you have to understand what you want to regulate. Drafting regulations without understanding the environment, the startups, the technologies, does not necessarily make sense to me, probably not to most of the people in the room. So before you can actually regulate something, you really need to understand. That just takes time. But having the approach of wait and see, it's not just that you have to sit down, lean back and wait, right? You have to actively speak to the fintech startups. You need to go into the market. You need to go into the co-working spaces. You need to see and feel what's it like working with fintech startups and what they would like to see, what's possible and what's not possible.
It sounds like maybe you're saying to wait first, see what people put out there, but then kind of react in some time.
No, it's a very proactive approach. So you don't just wait, right? You go out, you speak to the startups, you feel, you understand what they need, and based on what you've seen, what you've understood, and based on a very collaborative approach, you can then think of drafting regulations.
So I'll build on that as well. So last week I went to a seminar hosted by the National Financial Supervisory Committee, and they were engaging with a lot of officials from Korea and looking at the market over there and saying, what is it that's actually helped, not necessarily fintech, but startups generally? Why is the ecosystem there much better than it is in Vietnam? So there's some really good conversations about what are the elements that make up Korea's startup ecosystem. So again, starting with education, what is it that Vietnam needs to change about its education system to increase the number of people who can actually work in these startups? What is it around the actual regulations that prohibit capital flows? So why is it that the startups here cannot get as much funding as they need? And that was the key focus, to say, well, if they can remove some of those barriers to allow startups to get access to funds, they'll grow more quickly. and then some of those regulations that are stopping them do their business itself, taking it step by step, but again, looking at different markets around the world, Korea, Japan, Australia, wherever, the US. But the SBV and the various ministries are very proactive in going out, doing the study tours, engaging the overseas regulators, and taking back the best of what's happening around the world. So I think, again, they are being proactive.
Okay, I would like to get back to the question of funding startups a little bit later in the panel, but I do want to go back to Tobias, your suggestion that instead of a wait-and-see approach, we want to collaborate with the private sector. So when it comes to the private sector, how should the private sector cooperate with the government or regulators to how to promote innovation?
So more generally speaking, I think it's a two-sided approach. The private sector needs to speak to the government, as well as the government needs to be open to speak to the private sector. So myself, we also run an acceleration program in Singapore, and most of the startups, when they come to me and ask like, hey, who's the financial authority I need to speak to? They don't even know what is the single point of contact, who they should speak to. So being able to have like a dedicated team at the regulator who's focusing on financial technology, or who's basically in charge of an innovation hub that facilitates the idea exchange between the startup community as well as the regulators would be really helpful for both sides. So I think like if you can bridge the conversations between startups as well as the government by having like a financial technology innovation group as the MAS in Singapore has, would be really helpful.
I'd just like to add to that. I think to credit the Vietnam government, I find that they like to engage and they like to reflect. And I think that's very healthy for the industry. I think it's very healthy for the country. I think what it shows is what I think a lot of us know, which is that Vietnam, by and large, is that young, tech-savvy population, embracing technology, finding ways to leapfrog. And you will actually find that amongst government sectors, believe it or not. I would also say that I am aware that a lot of the major tech companies, perhaps a lot of the companies that a lot of you would be looking up to, I can say that they do engage the Vietnam government very actively. I've sat in meetings with them, giving feedback about draft regulations, looking at how these IT services are regulated, whether cross-border data flow is going to be impeded, whether you force people to have local service, etc. So I will highly encourage the local players, the local industry. Yours is an excellent example, of course, to engage regulators, to tell them, what is it that your business is about, what model you're trying to achieve, what are the things that you would like support for, what are the things that impede you, let us help you understand, what fintech's about. And I do believe that, you'll find government counterparts that are receptive. I think it's quite interesting too that you also find government counterparts that have very varying degrees of how open or how narrow they want to be. Just a very quick example, the government's civil cipher committee is actually more open to foreign market access than the Ministry of Information and Communications. You find that in the regulations, which I thought was quite funny.
Now, we've spoken very generally, but maybe you can give us some specific examples when it comes to a private company and dealing with regulations. For example, did you know who you needed to talk to when it came to compliance with various laws?
I think for the first time we start, we don't know it yet. And we have to go to several countries to take a reference. Which department they should talk to, things like that.
Which countries?
Yeah, I think that the Philippines the most. Yes, Philippines is a very close case. And and then I come to see Mr. Tien, as General Director of Payment Department, and he's the one to help us to settle on the connection with the other department. So I think that we are lucky to have a good conversation with him and good help from State Bank of Vietnam.
Warren, do you have anything you would like to add when it comes to banks or companies and dealing with regulations?
I think back to the point before about e-signatures and I guess changing some of the regulations we've got at the moment. A lot of the regulations are very much high level, so they can be interpreted in different ways. So the way I see it is the regulations are very well written. The SBV and other organisations are very open to discussion, but it's generally the private companies are very conservative in terms of the way they interpret them. So I don't think the regulators are at fault. It's more the companies willing to kind of push the line a bit more. So I guess it's interesting with what MoMo are doing and kind of how they're working within the regulations at the moment and still pushing the boundaries a little bit. But again, we've had a very good relationship with the SBV and different ministries. So.
But you would say that companies in general have problems figuring out how to comply with the regulations?
It's difficult to say in general. I think what I've seen about certain banks in Vietnam, I think they err on the side of caution.
So maybe I would like to go back to you, because you said you kind of looked at what they were doing in the Philippines. So maybe were there other countries? Are there countries which you kind of look at as a model that Vietnam should follow when it comes to fintech regulation?
I think that the most open country that I see is Cambodia. They're very open to the new system. Yes, I'm very surprised on that. Say, okay, you can do anything that you like, but you cannot break the law, but we see what happened and we regulate you. But the fact that we see that two most success case for mobile money is my service in the world is the Philippines and Kenya. They got very good support from the government from the beginning, because the government have work with the law enforcement, look with the bank, with the other one to push it forward. The otherwise, the tiny fintech company come to the market, talk with the bank is no way, and dealing with how to persuade customers, how to talk with government to get payment is very difficult. So I think that the involvement from of the government for the fintech company at the beginning is very important.
So you're saying the government should be more active, actually?
Yes, I think so.
Or Tobias, maybe you can tell us from your perspective or the ADB's perspective, in the various countries that are covered under the ADB, which countries have better models when it comes to regulation, and where does Vietnam stand?
I think that's a very difficult question, because the different markets that we are focusing on is Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam, and those markets are so fundamentally different. I mean, if you look at Vietnam, for example, you have already a very, very active crowd that is trying to innovate. If you look into Laos, for example, most of the people, they have never even heard about fintech. So if you, for example, then if you speak to the regulators in Laos, they don't even know what fintech regulation.
Okay, but would you say that Cambodia's approach has worked out for them?
I think that I fully agree with what he just said, that the regulators, they should actually be more active, as I already mentioned in my presentation this morning.
Yeah.
I think it is not the right approach to just see and to just say, like, we're super open, we see what's happening, and then we may in future regulate that particular fintech startup. So I think it's really about like being active, engage with the startups, and then find out what regulations and rules are needed. If we look into Cambodia or Vietnam, regulations are still at a very, very infant state, but that is fine due to the infancy of the market in general, right? So we just need to make sure that we don't lose track of what's going on outside the governmental bodies.
Yeah. Chung, you're from Singapore, and Singapore is a regional financial hub. There's a lot of innovation happening there, and do you think that their model is something that we should look up to, or that other countries should perhaps copy?
Well, I mean, I guess in the region, there are a few of the nations which you say with taking economic and stuff, and certainly Singapore be one of them. I also say, certainly Japan, or South Korea. So I think these are countries that you look to see what they're doing in terms of whether it's the startup or technology realm, I was very interested hearing from Tobias about how Singapore actually goes around the world looking for interesting tech startups, I think fintech in particular, and actually get them to come to Singapore for a period of time. But of course, in fairness, Singapore has adopted this extremely business-friendly, let's innovate, go forward, we can do better than chicken rice mentality for a very long time. For countries to actually, take steps in that direction. Again, nothing's impossible, things will change as history shows, but it does mean, yes, it does take concerted effort and courage from leadership to actually bring it forward. Cambodia is always an interesting study. In a way, they have nothing to lose. They should just go for whatever they think. They should give everything a shot. I think China is a bit interesting because like that Lenny Kravitz song, they're going their own way. So that's why the Great Firewall of China, and then from what I did the research on, and I'm sure the folks here that know the answer, it seems that Bitcoin's heavily traded in China. So China and cryptocurrency looks like something that is really pretty vibrant. And maybe they're willing to go for it because they're unabashed about saying that we're trying to be leaders in technology. Whether they beat Tesla, their own game, that's up for debate. But they're unabashed for saying that is their agenda. And I think because of the, for better or for worse, of that Great Firewall of China thing, they are able to feel that they have some management over their what goes around within their borders. Again, I'm not saying that that's the best model for them. Put it this way, the population and land mass and everything is much bigger. And I think the larger wisdom is that this is an ecosystem that is and should be truly global. And just remember, even in the TPP negotiations, one of the last things that was heavily negotiated, and one of the things that's heavily negotiated was a change of microphone. And apparently, one of the last few things that got finalized was the e-commerce chapter. And almost basic as it may sound, the fundamental principle there was that, TPP nation states ought not be impeding cross-border data flows. They shouldn't be forcing people to have a local presence or put a server in a country. And what does that all mean? It just means that we are trying to encourage cross-border transactions, cross-border data flows.
And Warren, obviously, your bank is in Vietnam and has to comply with Vietnamese laws. Is there ever a time when you wish that that your bank was following the laws of another country?
Many a time. No, I think in all seriousness though, as I said before, I think that the laws themselves, the regulations are a little bit immature, so there's a lot of grey in them to a certain extent. So it does take time to actually go through and interpret what they should be and how they should be executed. So I think Chung talked before about the information security laws. It's a very long document, but it's very light on substance. So in terms of how do you actually execute these things, there'll be, again, to what Chung was saying, a lot of red tape, a lot of new licenses that will need to be taken into account. So when we're dealing with providers, we know we're going to have to do a lot more checks to, and look for a limited number of companies that can supply those services. So again, it will make it a little bit harder for us. But I think the key thing is the ease of doing business and the ease of going through the processes that's difficult. So again, when I had a look at the sandbox kind of aspect in Singapore, it's very clear in terms of what the companies have to do, very clearly documented. You do A, B, C, D. If Vietnam employed something similar, it would be much easier. So again, we had MoMo had a trial license for 6 years, but it's very grey, very ambiguous. As a bank, we couldn't take the risk and say, well, there's a bit of grey there. We've got shareholders, we've got, and again, we are complying with not just the laws of Vietnam, but also to a certain extent, the corporate laws and Australian law by me being here as well. So I've got to look at different angles as well. But I think, again, it's getting there. I think Vietnam's doing, it's doing the right thing in terms of tightening its regulations in the right areas. Sometimes there's a couple of mistakes, but it's on the right path.
Okay, so it sounds like it's complicated.
Yeah.
And as it's complicated, I'd like to jump to the next topic, which is how does this affect a company's ability to attract investment if they're based here in Vietnam? How does that affect companies even starting up to begin with? And okay, Tobias, do you have, or Chung?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. Vietnam, I'm looking at it from a sort of a foreign investment perspective, yeah? Vietnam wants foreign investors, they love foreign investment, they want foreign technology, they want foreign capital. That's all great, all right? However, they really want to regulate it. They want to regulate and they want to know who is the investor, how much they're investing, what are the business activities, what are the business lines. Okay, the reason for that is that they feel that certain industries are wide open, that's fine. You want to come here and build a factory that manufactures shoes, okay, go ahead. But what if you want to come in and invest in something that's e-commerce, fintech, all right? Then you're going into business lines, business models that Vietnam's laws are currently not well suited to accommodate. We all know that Vietnam, was 2001 had a bilateral trade agreement with the US, one of its major trade agreements. 2007, joined the WTO club. In order to join the WTO club, they had to open the doors for certain businesses like trade and distribution or say telecommunications, okay? And all these business lines are kind of, as you look at it now, clearly very traditional, very old school. I'm not saying it's not relevant, still relevant, but very traditional. You won't find something in the 2007 trade agreements about e-commerce or fintech or payment solutions. You just won't. All right? And so therefore, it creates a situation where, the Vietnam government might sit back a bit and consider and question, whether or not this particular sector, this particular business line, e-commerce, payment solutions, is that open up for foreign investment or not? Fortunately, they do have things like trial licenses, pilot programs, which sort of allow the sort of pioneering efforts. But at the same time, it does give, some investors cold feet, right? I think Warren just mentioned that. It's not just his bank, it's their other stakeholders, it's their other investors and shareholders, with corporate governance in the background, compliance officers looking around the corner and stuff like that. They will have, a pretty, sharp view about whether or not, hey, can we make this investment? Oh, is this business model, licensed and regulated in Vietnam? So I guess one final note that I always like to share for the folks there in startups and trying to build up a successful business and everything. Boring as it may sound, I know I'm a lawyer, but things like compliance and corporate governance is extremely important. Whilst it's true that we can't wait for the umpteenth license and clarity before we all do our stuff, just bear in mind that when somebody comes to look at your house, when you're trying to sell it, they are checking more or less that your house is in order. And quite sadly, I've seen deals fall down because the seller's house was not in order.
Thanks. Now, your company is an example of a company which actually successfully attracted a very large investment from outside Vietnam, and it's rare. So how could we change things in Vietnam so that this happens more frequently? How can we make this a more attractive place for companies to attract investment?
I think that my company have two investors, is Goldman Sachs and Standard Chartered Private Equity, and both time is 1 year of only paperwork for legal. I think the due diligence is about 1 or 2 months, but most of the time is about legal things. And although State Bank give us a license, but we did a lot more kind of license from DPI, from planning and investment department, from taxation, from a lot of things, and even accounting, because my accounting is not like American accounting thing, and we have to do it again. And the other very painful thing is AML and ABC, and we apply that model in the companies. It's very painful job, and when we have 4,000 agents, is how to training with them, how to testing them, how to make them comply with that. It's so difficult. And for the first thing, we think that is a deal broker and we never get it. But in the end, we overpass it. But so in my experience, is the most difficult thing in the deal with foreign investment is legal. And it's got a lot of times, a lot of money, and a lot of effort. And we don't know where it finishes. We don't know until the end. we put million dollars on legal due diligence. It's true. It's true.
You have my name card, right?
So Tobias, I think you have some things to say when it comes.
Sorry, just want to add, but that's how you become successful. You're tenacious, and you work through it. And budgeting time, cost, fees, definitely a must.
Yeah, I think earlier this morning I was already talking about how licensing issues are basically restricting peer-to-peer lending players to actually issue or attract the institutional investors that it needs to really grow, to have a sustainable growth of that peer-to-peer lending business. And I mean, even in Singapore, since peer-to-peer lending per se is not regulated in Singapore, I recently spoke to a couple of institutional players who would like to be involved, but one of the major constraints is that peer-to-peer lending platforms are not regulated, are not licensed, and therefore it is impossible for them to invest into those platforms or to buy some loans from those platforms, because those institutional investors, they also have stakeholders, and due to corporate governance, it does not allow them to invest into unregulated businesses, which is not beneficial for the startup. It's not beneficial for the institutional investor, and ultimately it's also not beneficial for the economy, because the moment you do not have the licenses in place that it needs, you cannot grow economy, you cannot increase employment ultimately.
And Warren, you mentioned that your bank wouldn't have been able to invest in MoMo. Are there any changes that we could make when it comes to regulations where you could take, where your bank could make more risky investments like that?
I didn't actually say that we couldn't invest in MoMo. I just couldn't afford Chung's fees, that's all. No, I don't think it's that. That was a business decision, and again, there's other things going on there. But no, I think so for example, for not maybe VIB, but more Commonwealth Bank, so we invested in a South African fintech startup that had businesses in Kenya and Nairobi as well. Similar kind of risk profile there as well. So some of it was unregulated, some of it was, we had the whole issue around AML and ABC and everything else there. So again, the entity itself is willing to kind of invest, but as long as the conditions are right. And I think Chung made a good point about making sure that the organization's house is in order. So I do a lot of work with startups here, and we've got a good relationship with Vietnam, Silicon Valley. And a lot of the challenge I see there is that the startup founders themselves don't really understand the value of doing this early on. They'll kind of create a great MVP, launch it, get some customers, and then you go in there and you say, okay, well, how are you managing your accounts? How are you looking at the payroll, the legislative compliance? And you get blank faces. And it's like, okay, well. But then they ask the question of how do I get money from South Korea? How do I get money from Japan? Well, you've got to spend 6 months and clean these things up first. No one will look at you until you've got the basics in place. So I think it's raising the awareness of the need to do that. And again, as I said before, it's about education, coaching, and I think there's a lot more accelerators and incubators here as well. I'd like to see more of that being enforced, getting some, maybe not Baker McKenzie at those sort of fees, but if you do some pro bono work, educating the startups on how to actually put some basics in place so they're ready for investment.
Okay, so we're
just one note on that, and I think it's also one of the most important things accelerators and incubators have to focus on. Having the compliance and regulations right is one of the most crucial things if you build your startup business. Because you have so many tech-savvy founders, they just build the product without focusing on compliance, risk, and regulatory frameworks. If you start up your own business, focus on regulation first, go to risk management and then compliance, and then you can actually start off building your business. Because as he said, right, institutional investors or even angel investors, they will find out over the time if you haven't done it right in the first place. And it can even start with storing customer data on Google Drive, right? I mean, that is the biggest issue that I see, what even startups in Singapore, they just don't take care of data privacy policies.
Okay, so understanding of regulations is very important for fintech startups. We have just a few more minutes, and I would like to take some questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand.
Right, good afternoon. Maxime from Standard Chartered. I think we talked a little bit about adoption from a regulatory perspective, but my question is, what about the adoption of new technology by the end user himself? I mean, Vietnam is 99.9% cash. What are the obstacles in converting that into digital? I have part of the answer, but I'd like to hear from people from this panel as to whether it's a mindset issue, whether it's a regulatory issue, whether it's a tax avoidance issue, whether it's a data privacy issue. I mean, I'd like to hear your thought on that.
There was a previous panel that I was on. I think somebody asked that question about, I think somebody asked, was it Dominic? Dominic, where are you? Whether or not, there you are. Somebody asked you, is Bitcoin meant to disrupt, the more traditional payment methods and all that? I think you answered it, I think it was you, that said actually the thing that you're truly trying to disrupt is cash. Because Vietnam still uses a lot of cash. And if you're rich, maybe the gold under the bed. And I think it comes down to, what people feel confident and familiar with. So it's the culture of the consumer, how they spend. They prefer to have cash in their pockets. Again, I think they've gotten more used to credit cards, but I dare say the penetration is not incredibly high as well. And even for those which use credit, those that have credit cards, what percent of them actually go online and do e-commerce transactions? I think that figure gets even smaller. So coming back to something that you said, which was all the regulatory stuff, love it. But apart from all that, cybersecurity, you don't put your customer's name on somewhere that's unsecured. All right, that data is the new gold that has to be secured. All right, to give your customers confidence, and not to mention, you have to meet regulations that actually require that, and especially if you're in fintech, because the two most sensitive information will be financial information and medical. So I think what has to happen is that providers will have to show and make consumers feel that it's safe and it's secure to use your services, to use your products. You don't have to carry cash. Today you can carry a card. Tomorrow you carry something else. So I think that's the kind of mindset that needs to change.
But Diep, your company's product actually it is a product for consumers to pay with things without cash.
I really hate you, Maxime. You put a very difficult question. Actually, for consumer, they don't care about technology. They care what you can benefit you can bring to them. And fighting with cash with a country like Vietnam, like 99% with a cash economy, is very tough job. And we cannot do it alone, but we need owner ecosystem doing that. For example, I make you an example. Before 7 years ago, when I talked with electricity company in Ho Chi Minh City, let MoMo collect money for you. I said, no way, I have people knock at the door. No way, what happened with my 2,000 people knock at the door? But in the end, they have to cut costs, and they see that, okay, this is a good way to collect money. Before, one of the money collector have to come to customer for 3 or 4 times. Now they come only 1 time. If you're not at home, you have to pay with MoMo or the other mechanism. So that's a good way. And for the other companies, we work with them to put promotions, and they think for people. So they see that, okay, that's good to try. And for the end user customer, we have a journey for them. Okay, we have to persuade them to install the app first, use the app 1 time, then put them some trial, and then they attach their bank account to that or credit card. I think it's a long journey. It's not simple. And it cannot use technology for one night that you can change the world. It takes time and it effort for everybody in the system. Yeah, and I think for example, like the government, before when you do some paperwork with them, you have to come directly. And you have half a day to waiting and the other half a day to come to collect it. Now they can do it to the post office, right? Everybody easy. So that's why we need the whole ecosystem work with us.
Okay, so I completely agree. I think we've had to deal with EVN as well, and I guess there's the whole business case around. Well, actually, the cost is negligible for those people to collect the money, so it's not that big an issue. And also the convenience factor as well. So you're competing with someone's going to come to your door, you know they're going to come 3 or 4 times. If you don't have the money, you can tell them to come back. They're unlikely to cut off your electricity until the 5th time they come. So it's the, why would I use a mobile app? Why would I go and have to go to a bank or something and deposit my money to then pay it? I can just give it to the guy on the scooter who comes to my door. So it's changing, looking at some of the, what are the customer problems, what are we trying to solve here? Vietnam bill payment is pretty easy. Everyone comes to my door and I've got cash and I give it to them. It's not like in Western countries where I have to deposit money, log on online and send it through. It's simple anyway. The other angle to consider as well is trust. So, looking at e-commerce, for example, when I first moved over here and I ordered a TV and a fridge online and had it sent to the house, and I paid for it on my credit card. And in the house, the helper said, "What are you doing? You've already paid for it. You can't trust these people. You've got to open the box, you've got to turn the fridge on, you've got to turn the TV, and you've got to make sure it all works before you pay." And I said, "That's crazy. Like I've bought things online all over the world before. I don't need to, I've used my MasterCard. I'll get the money back if it doesn't work." But there's a perception that you can't trust people. So I think it's not just the ecosystem. I agree, it's the issuing and acquiring needs to be fixed in some of those key services, but I think there's some other angles around trust. How do we improve that before e-commerce and some of these frictionless transactions can happen effectively?
Okay, thanks, Warren. We're kind of into the next panel, so I'll cut this panel short now. Quick round of applause for the panelists, please.